There is an island in the Mediterranean where anyone looking at a satellite image will immediately notice something strange. Not the coastline, not the white sandy beaches, or the crystal clear blue bays, but a straight line that splits the island in two, from the east coast to the west, as if someone took a knife and sliced right through the middle. That line is not a river, not a mountain range, not any kind of natural border. It is a line drawn by man. And the story of that line, of why it exists, of what happened before it was drawn, is one of the most enigmatic stories of the 20th century that few in the West know. This is Cyprus, the last divided island in Europe. And to this day, after more than 50 years, that dividing line is still there. So what happened? Let's start with a detail that almost no one remembers. That famous dividing line, known as the Green Line, was not drawn by an international treaty or years of peace negotiations. It was drawn in a matter of hours, with a green pencil, by a British general sitting over a map on a night at the end of 1963. His name was Major General Peter Young. That night, while gunshots still sporadically echoed through the streets of Nicosia, he sat down and drew a straight line through the capital. The colour green was chosen because it was a neutral colour, not the blue of the Greek flag, nor the red of the Turkish flag. He thought it was just a temporary solution. He never expected that ink line to last for more than 60 years. But to understand why a pencil could divide an island, you need to understand something much more important. You need to understand Cyprus's position on the world map. If you open a map and look at the Mediterranean region, you'll see Cyprus situated in the northeastern corner, like a stone placed right in the middle of three worlds. To the north is Turkey, only 70 kilometers away. To the east are Syria and Lebanon. To the southeast are Israel and the Palestinian coast. To the southwest is Egypt. And to the west, a little further, is the European continent. No other island in the Mediterranean is located in such a strategic position. Imagine you are an empire, wanting to control all maritime trade from Europe to the Middle East. Every ship has to pass through here. Imagine you want to deploy a navy to protect colonies in North Africa or to threaten the Ottoman Empire. Cyprus is the perfect base. It is not too large to be difficult to defend, nor too small to be useless. It is located exactly where any maritime power would want to control. The island has an area of about 9,500 square kilometers, slightly larger than Hanoi province. Its length is about 270 kilometers from east to west. The highest point is Mount Olympus in the Troodos Mountains, nearly 2,000 meters high, where it still snows in winter while the coast below remains warm. The terrain creates two distinct climate zones. The northern plain is a fertile strip of land, suitable for agriculture. The southern mountainous region is harsher, but hides ancient pine forests and stone castles from the Crusader period. And the coast, with more than 300 days of sunshine per year, is one of the most beautiful in the Mediterranean. But that beauty has never helped this island escape its destiny. Because of its critical location, Cyprus has almost never belonged to the Cypriots themselves. If you were to read the island's history as a list of its rulers, you would find it strangely, almost endlessly long. The ancient Greeks came to settle around 3200 BC, bringing their language and beliefs with them. Then came the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Persians, Alexander the Great. Then came Rome, then Byzantium, the Crusaders, the House of Lusignan, the Republic of Venice, and finally, in 1571, the Ottoman Empire. Each time it changed hands, the island absorbed another layer of new culture. But the Greek layer, established in the most ancient of times, never disappeared. By 1000 BC, Cyprus was essentially a Greek island in cultural terms. The Greek language, the Greek Orthodox religion, and a sense of Greek identity were deeply ingrained in every village, every monastery, every family. This became important when the Ottomans arrived. The Ottomans did not try to erase the Greek identity. Instead, they administered the island under the Millet system, a structure in which religious communities managed their own internal affairs. The Greek Orthodox were allowed to keep their schools, courts, and community leaders. The same was true for the Muslim Turks. The two communities lived side by side for centuries, sometimes in the same villages, sometimes trading with each other. But they did not integrate. They coexisted in parallel. This was the seed of the tragedy to come. More than 300 years of coexistence without integration meant that when the world changed, when empires fell, and nation-states emerged, the two communities did not share a common Cypriot identity. They were still Greeks and Turks, living on the same island. And the turning point came in the year 1821. The Greek War of Independence broke out on the mainland. Some Greek Cypriots left the island to fight on the Greek side. The Ottomans reacted by executing 486 influential Cypriots, including the Archbishop. This was a clear message. Do not dream of unifying with Greece. But instead of extinguishing the idea, the crackdown fanned its flames. Enosis, Greek for union, union with Greece, became the dominant political dream of the island's Greek community. Not independence, not self-governance, but becoming a part of Greece, completely, permanently. That dream would lead to blood and tears for both sides for decades to come. Meanwhile, geography pulled another great power onto the map of this small island. In 1878, after the Russo-Turkish War, Great Britain reached an agreement to lease Cyprus from the Ottomans. In return, Britain pledged to protect Turkey from Russian pressure. For the British, Cyprus was a perfect base to protect the route through the Suez Canal and control the Eastern Mediterranean gateway. Once again, geography determined destiny. The Greek Cypriots initially welcomed the British, hoping that the Western power would pave the way for Enosis. But the British had no such intention. In 1914, when the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers in World War I, Britain officially annexed Cyprus. In 1925, the island became a British Crown colony. And from here, things began to simmer. The British raised taxes. They tightened control over Greek schools. They refused all discussions of Enosis. In 1928, Greek Cypriots boycotted the 50th anniversary celebration of British occupation of the island. 3 years later, the frustration reached a boiling point. In October of 1931, 5,000 Greek Cypriots took to the streets in Nicosia, chanting slogans demanding Enosis. They burned down the government house. They tore down British flags from public buildings. The British suppressed them. More than 2,600 people were arrested, and 7 were killed. Governor Ronald Storrs declared martial law, dissolved all political parties, and abolished representative government. The atmosphere was more explosive than ever. And then, in 1955, an organisation appeared, whose acronym would later be associated with one of the most violent periods in the island's history. It was GEOX, the National Organisation of Cypriot Fighters. Their goal was one, and only one: union with Greece by any means, including force. What followed is known as the Cyprus Emergency, a 4-year armed insurgency against British colonial rule. GEOX attacked police stations, military installations, and colonial officials. The British brought in more troops and tightened security. By the time it subsided, 371 British soldiers had died, along with over 100 Greek Cypriots. But this was only part of the picture. While the fight against the British was ongoing, another community on the island was watching and worrying. The Turkish Cypriots, making up about 20% of the population, realized that if Enosis succeeded, they would become a minority in a Greek state. No one asked for their opinion. No one guaranteed their rights. They formed their own armed organization. And instead of wanting Enosis, they began to want the complete opposite, Taksim, which means partition in Turkish, to divide the island in two. The north for the Turks, the south for the Greeks. 2 dreams, 2 communities, 1 island. This is the geographical trap that Cyprus fell into centuries ago. Its position between Greece and Turkey, between Europe and the Middle East, meant that no one could simply be Cypriot. Everyone belonged to a larger community, a more distant nation, a longer history. The world could not let a civil war erupt in the middle of the Mediterranean. In 1958, representatives from Greece and Turkey, the 2 mother countries, sat down to negotiate. The result was the Zurich and London agreements. Cyprus would not unite with Greece. Nor would Cyprus be partitioned. Cyprus would become an independent country. On August 16th, 1960, the Republic of Cyprus was born. But this was not the end of the story. This was merely the prelude. The new constitution of Cyprus was built on a very complex formula. Power was divided along ethnic lines. Greek Cypriots made up 70%, Turkish Cypriots 18%, with the remainder being other communities. The president would always be a Greek Cypriot, the vice president always a Turkish Cypriot. Turkish Cypriots were guaranteed 30% of the seats in parliament and the public service. The vice president had absolute veto power over decisions related to defense, foreign affairs, and internal security. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like a fair arrangement. But no one really wanted this. The Greek Cypriot leadership felt that the rights granted to the Turkish Cypriots were disproportionate to their population size. The Turkish Cypriot leadership did not believe the peace could last. And just 3 years after independence, all those fears came true in the most brutal way. The night of December 20th, 1963, a night that would go down in history as Bloody Christmas. 2 Turkish Cypriots were killed by Greek Cypriot police. To this day, no one knows if it was an accident or intentional. But that no longer mattered. Within hours, violence spread throughout the city. Cars carrying armed Greek Cypriots drove through residential areas and opened fire indiscriminately. Turkish Cypriots fired back at patrolling police cars. Gunshots rang out on Christmas night. This was not war in the classic sense. This was a massacre between neighbours, between people who had lived together for decades on the same street. When the violence subsided, 364 Turkish Cypriots and 174 Greek Cypriots were dead. About 25,000 Turkish Cypriots from 104 villages fled their homes. That was a quarter of the total Turkish population on the island. They gathered in enclaves, huddling together in fear, while the island's police and public services effectively became Greek Cypriot institutions. And that was when the British general picked up the green pencil. In the final days of 1963, Major General Peter Young sat before a map of Nicosia. His intelligence officer took out several coloured pencils. The blue of the Greek flag was not acceptable. The red of the Turkish flag was also not acceptable. They chose green, a neutral colour, traditionally used to mark obstacles on military maps. General Young drew a straight line through the capital. The Green Line was born. No one thought it would last. It was just a temporary ceasefire line to separate the two sides from each other's firing range, until a permanent solution could be found. 10 years later, there was still no permanent solution, and things were about to get much worse. The 15th of July, 1974. This is a date every Cypriot knows, though no one wants to remember. The Greek military junta under Dimitrios Ioannidis staged a coup d'etat in Cyprus. The goal was to overthrow President Makarios III and replace him with a leader who supported Enosis. Greek officers leading the Cypriot National Guard stormed the presidential palace in Nicosia. Makarios narrowly escaped. Nikos Sampson, an extremist known for his violent actions against Turkish Cypriots since 1963, was installed in power. This was the scenario that Turkey had feared since the first day of Cypriot independence. Just 5 days later, Turkey acted. On the 20th of July, 1974, Turkish paratroopers landed in northern Cyprus. Ankara invoked its right to intervene under the 1960 Treaty of Guarantee, which allowed Greece, Turkey, and the United Kingdom to intervene if the Cypriot constitution was violated. Turkish fighter jets flew low over Nicosia. Warships landed troops on the northern coast. Neither side was truly prepared for this. International pressure forced a temporary ceasefire, but negotiations failed. On the 14th of August, Turkey launched a second, stronger, faster offensive. The Turkish army advanced south like a flood. The towns, villages, and fertile plains of the north fell to them one by one. When the guns officially fell silent on the 16th of August, 1974, Turkey controlled 37% of the island. And this is where the tragedy reached its true nadir. 180,000 Greek Cypriots were driven from their homes in the north. They had to leave everything behind: houses, lands, ancestral graves, gardens their families had tended for generations. They fled south with only what they could carry. At the same time, about 50,000 Turkish Cypriots from the south were relocated to the north, into the empty homes of the Greek families who had just fled. Two streams of people fleeing in opposite directions, neither wanting to leave. In that same week, Cyprus experienced the largest population exchange in post-war European history. Historians would later call this a displacement. The survivors called it something else. Northern Cyprus became the Turkish Federated State of Cyprus in 1975, with the hope that Greek Cypriots would recognize it and negotiate a federal solution. But that did not happen. After 8 years of failed negotiations, in 1983, the North declared full independence under the name of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Only one country in the world recognizes that state, Turkey. And General Young's temporary Green Line was now extended into a United Nations-controlled buffer zone, stretching 180 kilometers from the island's east coast to its west. North of that line, the Turkish army erected more barbed wire fences, concrete walls, watchtowers, anti-tank ditches, and minefields. The buffer zone ranges from a few meters to more than 7 kilometers wide in places, covering 346 square kilometers of the island's land. It was a land with no owner, no law, no future. Or so people thought. But what no one could have predicted was that nature had its own plan. When humans withdrew, nature moved in. Areas that were once fields, residential neighborhoods, and roads became wild. Undisturbed for over 50 years, the buffer zone has become a natural ecological corridor. In 2007, a biodiversity survey recorded 358 plant species, over 100 bird species, and 18 mammal species within the buffer zone. Many of these species thrive more in the buffer zone than in populated areas. While humans divided the land with politics, nature quietly reconnected it in its own ways. There is something else that few people know about. In the northeast of Nicosia, right in the buffer zone, there is an international airport. Nicosia International Airport was once the island's most modern gateway when it was inaugurated in 1968. Just 6 years later, in July of 1974, it was caught between the front lines. The United Nations declared it a protected area. Since then, not a single flight has taken off or landed there. Old airplanes still stand on the runway. Luggage carts still lie scattered in the terminal. The information desk still stands there, covered in dust, its electronic display long since turned off. The wall clock stopped at some point in 1974, and no one has wound it since. It's a war museum that no one intended to build. And there is another place, perhaps even more haunting. That place is Varosha, a resort near the city of Famagusta in the northeast of the island. Before 1974, Varosha was one of the most luxurious tourist destinations in the Mediterranean. High-rise hotels, luxurious restaurants, and long, fine white beaches attracted millionaires and movie stars from all over the world. On August 23, 1974, when Turkish troops advanced, about 40,000 Greek Cypriots fled Varosha. They thought they would return in a few days. They never did. The Turkish military fenced off the entire area. No one was allowed in. Varosha became a ghost town. For decades, hotel rooms with crystal chandeliers, shops with goods still on the shelves, and cars on the streets all slowly decayed under the Mediterranean sun. The swimming pool pumps continued to run for years, until they rusted and broke. The lights of the high-rise buildings flickered at night, then slowly went out over the years. Varosha is the most silent symbol of Cyprus's division. What does Cyprus look like today? If you stand on Ledra Street in Nicosia, on the southern side, you will see a normal shopping street. H&M, Starbucks, McDonald's, the familiar international chain brands. People walk around, shop, and drink coffee just like in any other European city. Then you reach a checkpoint. You show your passport, and you walk through. Immediately, the atmosphere changes completely. The northern side of Ledra is like stepping back into the 1970s. Not because it's beautiful or romantic, but because everything is slower, older, and less formal. Outdoor stalls replace air-conditioned stores. Small restaurants replace fast food chains. Because Turkey is the only country that recognizes the North, most international brands do not want to do business in a territory unrecognized by the world. Every day, Turkish Cypriots cross from the north to the south to work in the wealthier part, or to buy things that brands won't sell in the north. Greek Cypriots cross from the south to the north to eat more cheaply, buy gasoline at a lower price, and sometimes even to see a doctor. The two communities that once killed each other now cross back and forth daily for commerce, sharing the same island in a way that no one is entirely comfortable with, yet no one truly wants to stop. Since April 2003, after nearly 30 years of being completely closed, the crossing points along the line have been reopened. This was the biggest step forward in decades, though it is not a final solution. The last conflict-related death in the buffer zone occurred in 1996. There has been no violence for nearly 30 years, but the line is still there. Negotiations about the future of Cyprus continue, with three options always on the table: unification into a federal state, the coexistence of two independent states, or permanent partition between Greece and Turkey. These negotiations have dragged on for decades without a definitive result. Nicosia, the capital of Cyprus, remains the only divided capital in Europe to this day. After the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the entire European continent gradually integrated, declaring that borders no longer separated people. But in Nicosia, the United Nations blue-helmeted soldiers still patrol every day. Abandoned buildings still stand desolate between the two front lines, and people still carry memories of the homes they can never return to. The story of Cyprus is not a story of good guys and bad guys. Neither side is entirely innocent. Neither side is entirely right. This is the story of what happens when geography places two different communities in a space that is too small, and history does not give them time to become one. This is the story of the price of being the most important place on the map. Every empire that ever controlled the Mediterranean wanted this island for its location. And each time it changed hands, it left behind a layer of population, a layer of culture, a layer of unresolved tension. After accumulating for thousands of years, that weight erupted in the 20th century in a way no one could control. General Young's green pencil was merely the endpoint of a much longer process. And because that process was never resolved at its root, that line is still there. Today, when you stand at the Ledra checkpoint and look to the other side, you are looking at one of the strangest paradoxes of the modern world. An island that is not at war, but also not at peace. A place where people now pass through the same gate to buy coffee and gas, from which their parents once fled or were driven away. A buffer zone, once devastated by bombs, is becoming a sanctuary for birds and wild animals. The violence has stopped. The gates have opened. Life goes on in its own way. But the question that 500,000 Cypriots still cannot answer remains, hanging in the warm Mediterranean sky. When will that line disappear?